Well, is right. How's it going? Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I think I've been trying to get you on here for a while, but it just takes time.
It does. It
Um,
does.
so do you really quickly want to introduce yourself in your own words? Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me. It has been a few years, and I,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like finally I'm in a space where I'm down to talk openly about all these things that we're going to talk about today. So,
Okay.
my name is Melina Juárez Pérez. I'm an assistant professor at Western Washington University. I
Mm-hmm.
teach in political science and women, gender, and sexuality studies.
Okay, cool. That's really cool. Where's this university? I mean, in Western Washington, but where's that?
Yeah, we're in the Pacific Northwest, so we're
Okay.
up here in Nooksack and Lumi Nation territories, Coast Salish territories.
Okay.
We are not that far from the Canadian border. We're
Oh,
about maybe like 45 minutes south of it, an hour and a half north of Seattle.
okay. So you're north of Seattle. I'm gonna
Yeah.
be there next week.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. I have to. My
Cool.
sister's getting married, so I'm gonna
Right
be
on.
up there. So if you wanna, I mean, maybe I'll come kick it or whatever.
I'm down for that. Socially distant and masked up. Let's do
Yeah,
it.
no, let's do it. Yeah, for sure. No, it's what's crazy right now is that the New Mexico's doing the worst right now with transmission rates,
Mm.
and we were doing pretty good for a while, but it's
Mhm.
not so good right now, which is crazy. So, how are things going up
Yeah.
there with all of this?
It seems like things are, well, I was going to say things are going good, but again, when you start digging into the numbers
Hmm.
for Latinx folks, Chicanx folks, Black folks, Native folks, it is not going well, right? Like we're seeing the
Yeah.
numbers drop for white people, but for people of color, BIPOC folks, it's not
Hmm.
really,
Yeah.
we're not really seeing any respite here. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I
we're
think
doing,
I talked to Tim Green at the beginning of the pandemic, and we had talked about how it was like disproportionately impacting people of color. So I mean, do you care to kind of speak to that a little bit? I mean, I know what I know, and you know what you know, but I don't think a lot of people understand that why this is happening, right? Why it's not impacting white folks as much, and why it is, people of color, Latino people, right? Latinx people,
mhm,
African Americans, or just anybody from, marginalized groups. Can you
right,
speak to
right.
that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the big thing when thinking about these type of issues is that we can't look at it just as a
Mhm.
racial thing, right?
Right.
There's a lot more that are going on. And when you think about issues of class interacting with race and also with sexuality, when
Yeah.
we think about the ways that queer and trans people, especially Black queer and trans people and two-spirit people,
Hmm.
they're placed at the bottom of a barrel. They're considered subhuman by the system and by society in general.
Yeah.
And so when you have a population that's been so marginalized to that level, pre-pandemic, they already had lower levels of health insurance, of
Hmm.
healthcare access and quality of healthcare.
Hmm.
There, higher unemployment levels, people being pushed into informal economies,
Hmm.
things like that. So we had all of these conditions already going on. And then you get this massive, global pandemic that just wreaks havoc on the capitalist economic system that we have. Of
Right.
course you're going to see the people that were already at the bottom suffering the most. And
Yeah.
so when we think about, for example, the ways that American society and global society in general reacted to having to be quarantined and relying on gig workers, right, to get all of their basic
Hmm.
needs met,
Hmm.
their groceries, all these things. Well, who are the gig workers to begin with?
Right.
It's poor people of color mainly. Of course, there's poor whites, etc., like
Hmm.
we know, but it's mainly poor people of color. And so when you put the burden of taking care of all these quarantine, mainly white, like people, I'm not
Hmm.
gonna say like Gus because I'm not really sure what your job is, but like me as a professor, like we work from home, we can work from
Yeah.
home. But
Yeah.
when you're a gig worker, where you work in factories like farm workers, etc.,
Yeah.
they can't work from home, so they're
Hmm.
the ones out there being exposed. And
Yeah.
so there's multiple compounding aspects. Some of them are pre-existing and some of them are being
Hmm.
accentuated and created now that really put us even deeper at the bottom.
Right. No, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, it's something that it's hard to come out of as, a Chicano or a Latinx person, right? Mexican, whatever you want to call yourself. I consider myself more Mexican American, right, as my self title or label or whatever. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, well, a lot of, not at the end of the day, I was going to say really, a lot of people will really kind of debate that and argue that like, okay, well, I mean, from the economic standpoint, like those people, you guys are fine, right? Like I can work from home, you can work from home, but we're not necessarily like a good snapshot of what our, a good representation of what our people are going through, right? We were lucky enough to kind of get an education and kind of lift ourselves out of that. What's your experience with that? I mean, we can dive a little bit more into your background and your life, right? Um, how has education kind of shifted a lot of how you look at the world? Were you aware of all this stuff beforehand? And do you combat a lot of that kind of stereotyping around like, oh, they're not working hard enough, when in reality, that's not the case?
Yeah. I mean, this question is huge, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
at least for me, this has been my life
Mm-hmm.
story of trying to analyze all this. So
Right.
I grew up in the Central Valley, little tiny town called Houston,
Mm-hmm.
cow town, rural, 11,000 people, I think was the population forever. And we're farm workers. My parents are immigrants. And
Mm-hmm.
so really when I started realizing that the reason why we were poor wasn't because we didn't work hard or because we
Right.
were just inherently poor, I realized that working in the fields with my parents and seeing how farmers treated us and to see how hard we worked and we were still so poor, it
Yeah.
just didn't make sense to me. And so education did help me see these things. It's kind of hard. Education helped me both in a positive way where I
Mm-hmm.
did
Mm-hmm.
learn about these things through classroom discussions, all of that, right? Like what we like to think about education, opening your mind and all of this. But it also showed me how deeply ingrained inequality and oppression is.
Mm-hmm.
Just by the fact that certain things about my life weren't being represented in what we were reading, what we were learning. So it was kind of that dimension of it. And along with that, I was really involved in the immigrant rights movement and the student rights movement, trying to combat fee hikes and all of these things. So I was really, through that involvement, I was getting a bigger, wider picture of
Mm-hmm.
our position within society, and
Yeah.
that really helped me to start pulling out all of that socialization that I had,
Mm-hmm.
where I thought that our poverty was our fault. Because once you
Yeah.
start learning about how these systems are really like created to go against us, like for California, right? This is a really good example. It was a big
Mm-hmm.
aha moment for me. When I was reading this book, I have it right here. No
Yeah.
One is Illegal, from Mike Davis and Justin Akers Chacon. Such a good book.
Mm-hmm.
But it talks about the fact that after World War II or during World War II with the Japanese internment, they just took all of their land, all of these Japanese farmers, all of these other farmers, German farmers, etc., and then sold it for like pennies to white people. So
Mm-hmm.
all the farmers that I had been working under, they have this idea of like, oh yeah, bootstraps. My parents were immigrants. Look at what we are. And it's like,
Yeah.
they literally gave you the land because they took it from other people.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
why you're ahead of the game. It's not that you're more hardworking than we are.
Right.
You got a big old leg up from the government based on repression and death of this other group of people.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
once I figured that out, I was like, oh my God, like everything just kind of blew up. And then as we progress in school and academia, you get a lot more, knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
But that to
Mm-hmm.
me was a huge moment that, what, the system
Yeah.
has a lot to do with our placement in this society.
I mean, it does, right? And it kind of, it kind of proves the kind of I was going to transition into this, but this perfect transition that you just kind of laid out for me. It was the fact that like you started seeing that it's really near impossible to work yourself out of poverty. Like you can't, if you're working constantly and you're working hard, it's almost impossible unless you have something that pulls you out.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody helping you, somebody giving you something, because the system itself is built to keep people where they are. It's not
Mm-hmm.
built so there, it's the whole idea of like the bootstraps
Mm-hmm.
or the American dream. It really isn't real, right? That unless somebody literally helps you. And some people are fortunate enough to get that through like guidance or mentorship. Some people get guidance or like scholarships or guidance through education or through other things, but you need these other external components that help pull you out. Just working hard isn't going to do it, right? And like, yeah, like you said, going back full circle, these people have to keep working because it's impossible for them to survive without it,
Yeah,
right? So
exactly. There's
they're
no
already
safety net.
struggling. Yeah, they're already
Mhm.
struggling. So, I mean, what has been the biggest change between, I mean, your life as a graduate student when I first met you, and now life as a professor? I mean, it's you got a salary,
Yes.
which back then was just like next to nothing,
And insurance, full
and
coverage,
insurance, which is great.
dental and vision.
There you go. There you go. So there's now that you're like a success story, right? Because I remember you being presented to me as a a person who just really struggled and worked really hard to get to where you are, and now you are here, like looking back and looking at like your family maybe who's not doing so well, or maybe your colleagues or your community that you came from. Like, what do you do with that now? Like, what do you are you I take it, I feel guilty and I feel like I have to give back, right? Not just because of guilt, but because I hope I'm a good person and I want to help people. But
Yeah.
also, do you feel like there's this, it's, you're much more aware of that fact that like, okay, now I'm in a position of privilege.
hmm hmm Yeah, yeah, definitely in a
Mm-hmm.
position of privilege, with the stability and the income, and again, like going back to the insurance, that's a big deal for me having insurance after having not having it for so long. But there's a lot of stuff there in your questions. I mean, first, I would like to say that you're right. It does take a village for real, a lot of support
Mm-hmm.
networks, a lot of people
Yeah.
getting you through, because even graduate school, I would not have been able to do it without the support of the people that I
Mm-hmm.
was able to meet in Albuquerque, and like my elders, my family that I left there now,
Mm-hmm.
chosen family. And I did work very hard, but I didn't get to this job because I worked hard. My job was literally created. And I don't think I've ever told you this story. I've posted it on social media, sometimes, but
Mm-hmm.
basically what happened was that I struggled through the job market. I went along with this illusion of it's about publications. You're
Mm-hmm.
like this superstar because you have all these pubs, you have all these grants, but it's not in reality like that at all. It's
Mm-hmm.
about who you know and how mainstream you are. Academia does not want radical politics. It does not.
No,
Poli-sci does
or
not
poli
want
sci
radical politics.
evolve. Yeah.
It does not. No. And I mean, going back to the roots of our discipline, poli-sci was created by white supremacist eugenicists.
Mm-hmm.
They created it to understand bureaucratic colonial management. That is what the history of political science is. So anyway,
That's
I don't want to get too far. I love talking about that
I
stuff.
mean,
It's like
when I
part of
think
my
of
work.
yeah, no, no, no,
Yeah, it's
no.
a whole
I
nother
know this.
conversation.
I know this. Like statistics and all this, and the social sciences themselves were
Quantification.
specifically used to try to prove their point,
Yes,
right? That they were
exactly.
elite.
Their
Yeah.
point is that brown and black and indigenous people are uncivilized and we cannot govern ourselves. That is the point of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was very difficult to get a job, and I ended up in Arkansas. And talk about
Oof.
fucking trauma and ego death. Jesus Christ, it was rough.
Yeah.
But like I kept interviewing and I got interviews. I was not getting jobs. And when I came here to Western Washington, it's a very unique place. The political science department here, just the department, not the school. The school's like any other school.
Mm-hmm.
But in poli-sci, we have a majority of queer people of color. Like that's
Nice.
wild. That's
Yeah.
nowhere. We have like a good handful of queer people, and then people of color make up a majority of the department. And so what happened was that I came to interview for a Latinx politics position, right? And
Mm-hmm.
my disc is
Mm-hmm.
about Latinx. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I got this shit in the bag, like I'm getting all these
Mm-hmm.
interviews for Latinx politics, and then I didn't get hired for any of them, even though my disc was the first one to talk about this subject.
Right.
So, anyways, I didn't get that job, but the queer folk that were here, particularly Vicky Shui,
Mm-hmm.
I owe her so much because she took it upon herself to leverage her political capital to make a job for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like she pushed that through and got me a job. So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't just my hard work. It was, again, those networks, those connections, people willing to take bold action to get folks like myself into these positions. And
Yeah.
so I definitely take that as a responsibility. And I used to feel it as guilt, because I think that the way that like our community folks talk to each other, we do tend to guilt each other a lot,
Oh, yeah.
especially when we have money, right? Like the money or the credit, you got a good credit score, why aren't you helping? Like stuff like that, you know?
No, no, I
And
know. Yeah,
so,
I know. Like
yeah,
people
yeah. And
hit
so
you up for
there's
stuff or for help. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We have to help each other out. So I've always kind of carried the not necessarily a guilt, but that historical responsibility. I do feel like I myself in my work is a continuation of
Hmm.
these centuries of struggle. And so I really take it upon myself that whenever I gain any type of power or position, I leverage that shit out. Like
Yeah.
here it goes. I made it here. Here's all
Yeah.
this money. And that's how I see myself, you know, working through and giving back because yeah, I'm not going to become complacent and just, you know,
No, I mean we got to
just
help each
stay
other
here
up, right?
cushy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We got to pay it forward kind of deal,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And it's I mean that could be a very fatiguing thing in a lot of different ways, right? Because as a person of color in academia, one of the few people of color, specifically in the field that you're in, maybe not at the university you're at now, which is great, but it can be very very lonely, right? So you end up in the situation where you're just not able to really relate to anybody, and not only that, because there's so few of you, there's you end up having help or being asked for help by everyone, right? So not only that, do you feel like in a way you're kind of hindered, and not in a bad way, but like do you feel like because of that, because there's not as many people who maybe look like you or think like you're kind of held back because you have to stay back to help others? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And this is definitely something that, you know, other BIPOC faculty discuss that we have
Sure.
this extra layer of service that is very
Hmm.
emotional as well,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because we're having to, you know, help students navigate not just the politics of like, you know, more of the bureaucratic, institutional, technical stuff of the university, but
Hmm.
also all of these other ideologies that people walk around with, right? The white supremacy, the
No.
heteropatriarchy, all these things and it is difficult. Like I've been talking to just my colleagues here over the summer. I had probably like 4 or 5 students that as soon as the camera came on for office hours, it was like tears. Like they just
Mm.
could not,
Hmm.
you know, like handle. They had too much stuff going on. We're in a fucking global pandemic, right?
Hmm.
And my colleagues don't experience that. Like they
Hmm.
rarely get that,
Yeah.
but people
Yeah.
feel comfortable with me because of the age, who I am, all of this stuff. And so there is that added layer of that emotional, you know, support and guidance.
Hmm.
And as a queer person, I've actually also had quite a few students come to me and ask me about like sexuality, like how to be like their mentor in
Yeah.
a sense for that too, you know, because college is a place where we
Hmm.
do become more
Yeah.
open to more
Yeah.
of these liberatory practices. So I do have that type of work, but I don't see it as holding me back at all because
Hmm.
I approach things as relationship building. So if
Hmm.
my students are coming to me, that gives me a chance to really talk about these deeper ingrained ideologies that are producing the situation in which they're in. And
Yeah.
so to me, that's very valuable, especially
Yeah.
when these students are not in my classes. So I'm able to
Hmm.
reach out to folks that, you know, like weren't in my
Yeah.
class and I can
Yeah.
have these relationships with them. But there's definitely that feeling from other faculty, you know, and it's not, I don't see it as good or bad. It's just people are relating in different ways, but it
Hmm.
does become an extra burden that we are not being compensated for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you become these guides for people, right? And there's these
Mhm.
mentors on top of it, and it's a total privilege to be able to do that. I do it for family, I do it for friends, I do it for other people all the time, anytime I can, and it does become kind of an exhausting thing. I mean, I would just say take care of yourself too, though, right?
Yeah.
Like make sure you're taking care of yourself, because from experience, like you get burned out, and I don't want you to stop helping people, because that's just I from what I know about you, that's who you are, right? So make sure you take care of yourself too. But otherwise, I mean, you've um, you've seemed like a different person from the last time I saw you, because I think, you'd already comped at that point, right? I think so.
Yes. Yeah.
So at that point, you were just dissertating. And how is it? I mean, how was your experience during academia? It's like you seem alive.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I've been
Yeah.
working on decolonizing myself. Holy fuck, that was
Yeah.
a big thing. And
Yeah.
to me, looking back at graduate school, I definitely was not like a different person, but like I was definitely in a different type of headspace because
Hmm.
graduate school, academia in general, but graduate school in particular is purposefully a traumatizing place. They want to break you and they want to mold you into their image, right?
Hmm.
And just, UNM, fuck, they have some messed up politics. Like
Hmm.
they really do. The toxicity,
Hmm.
the culture. I mean, you were in that department.
Yeah.
I left a traumatized person. And when I started my first job at Arkansas, that shit continued. I mean, I had students that were trying to get me fired,
I remember
like
you.
they
Yeah.
thought they're,
Yeah.
yeah, it was intense. So I definitely did go through a period where I was just like, you know what, I'm just gonna die. Like, I don't even want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
What am I doing here? But the these folks that got me here, that got me this job, like really they did transform my life. And I ended up meeting a pretty good group of people here, other Chicanas, other
Hmm.
brown BIPOC folk. And we've been able to kind of just form these little crews of just support and spiritual healing, because that's kind of where I am at this point now. That
Hmm.
if I had not chosen to go towards the decolonization and healing aspect, I don't even know where I would be, because I was just so traumatized by the
Hmm.
process of graduate school that I was just like ready to quit. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
like this happiness, this glow is because of that healing, all of that work,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, no, you're right. You hit the nail on the head. And that was my experience with it too. A lot of the time, it's just like the fact that it really does tear you down. And it's, I mean, in a big way, I'm grateful because I've learned so much, right? And people come to me for like advice and for discussions, and because they know I can think critically, I know certain things in depth, right? But so I'm grateful for it in that sense. But like, yeah, like my sense of self and self-worth was not very high after that. And I like that you say decolonize, because there was this sense of, I mean, I moved around to different departments a lot, but like I feel like specifically in that department, it was when I felt the most just being like, throw out what you think you know. This is what you need to know, right? And that's the only way we're going to look at it. And it was a very difficult kind of thing to grapple with, because you start losing your identity and you start losing who you are, and that's not a very fun place to be. I genuinely like lost a lot because of that, right? Like emotionally in a relationship at that point, right? I'm doing good now, but like again, a few years later, a ton of self-work and it's not there. So it's not to scare people away from that, because I think academia in a lot of ways gave me a lot, but at the same time, like it needs to change, right?
Mhm.
And it's not a healthy place, right? You don't go there because you want to get well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
No,
You don't go there because you want to get well. So I mean, coming out of that, did you have like an idea of what you wanted to teach? I mean, you wanted to do Latinx, right?
mhm.
what how did you land on that, on Latinx specifically?
You know what? And yeah, okay. Another difficult question. I'm in the process of trying to like work through this, but I got my idea on Latinx through my initial research doing work on Latino politics
Hmm.
and Latino health,
Hmm.
and the fact that queer people were not present at all. I mean, some of my work now is pointing out how the history of survey research has evolved in Latino politics to completely erase queer people. I
Hmm.
mean, when you look at the very first surveys and track them through their progression, it wasn't until 2016 that a Latino or minority politics survey included a sexual orientation question
Hmm.
and another category for gender, because it's always been male and female. And even worse, before, when they used to do the phone surveys, they wouldn't even ask whether you were male or female. It was the person doing the interview deciding based on your voice whether you were a man or a
Oh,
woman.
no
Yeah,
way.
it's super problematic. And
Yeah.
so we have all of this research where queer people, they're just like invisible. And so I started asking questions about it, and that's where my dissertation came out of. And yeah, so the dissertation, I just went around and talked to a bunch of queer Latinx folks and asked them a bunch of things about politics, public opinion, and about the term itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my dissertation, and I haven't published anything because I kind of have this internal struggle now,
Okay.
where what is the point of Latinx when I don't like Latinidad, when I want to destroy Latinidad because it's a white supremacist settler colonial concept, you know? So I'm
Can
like,
you
I have
elaborate on
all,
that? Like, how is it? How is it that? I mean, I think that's a very interesting thing. You're just going to fly over.
oh yeah, yeah. It was because I talk about it all the time. So
Yeah, yeah.
yes,
So,
Latinidad. Whew, okay, so let's think about where do I even start? So Spanish colonization. No, just
mhm.
kidding. You could go that far, but no.
Yeah.
Fast forward, Latinos as a creation, it's an American political project.
Mm,
Latinos don't exist outside of the US, right?
mhm.
Outside of the US context. People in Latin America, people in the Caribbean, they have their own ways of identifying, some mainly through like nationalist terms, you know?
Nationality. Yeah.
And so Latinidad is supposed to be this way to bring together all of these different people that are coming from Latin America, that are
Oh.
immigrating here, but it's also a way to erase the long histories that Mexicans and indigenous people have in the
Mm.
United States. So it's a way to like gloss over American conquest. You know, it's a way to create us as foreigners. It's like when you think of Latinos, you think of foreigners, you think of immigrants,
They're all the other,
mainly,
right?
right?
They're the other. They're labeled the
Yeah,
other,
the
and now
other,
they're all the
exactly.
same other, right?
Exactly. And so
Okay.
that whole concept of Latinidad, of being Latino,
Hmm.
it's based on the same ideas and the same power hierarchies that we see in the overall American political landscape, right? So you
Hmm.
think about like white Mexicans or white Latinos, they're at the top, right? Like you think about like all the
Hmm.
blue-eyed, blonde, you know, white
Hmm.
Latinos. You
Yeah.
think about like heterosexuality being the main thing. Queer folk don't exist. You don't
Mhm.
talk about Black Latin Americans or indigenous, you know, Latin Americans or Latinx peoples. So it's just, Latinidad is just a microcosm of these grander American imperialist politics. And
Mhm.
so to me, it's like, okay, well, Latinx is, you know, an articulation of that. So how do I, you know, defend this term
Mm.
without reifying this
You're
very
perpetuating it.
problematic
Yeah.
concept?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I'd never thought about that. Wow. I mean, see, you're always just dropping bombs, man. But that's a good thing, though. I mean, that's a good thing to educate people on, right? To that's an actual thing, and decolonization of yourself is a very important part of that.
Mhm.
You know, so are you backing down from that then? Like, or what direction are you headed in? Which direction do you want to head in?
Uh, yeah, this is kind of like the internal struggle that's going on, like literally just like these last couple of weeks, because I
Hmm.
do feel the pressure, you know, to publish my work, and I owe the people that I interviewed that like I can't just sit on their stories, you know. And so how I'm approaching it now is really finding finding the analytical frameworks from like Black feminism, for example, that are really helping me kind of take a step back and understand my own positionality again within these discussions, right? So like I can't divorce myself from them. And that's what I had been doing before.
Hmm.
Whereas like I understood Latinidad was this white supremacist construct, or, you know, it's a lot more than that. And I knew that I didn't consider myself, I don't consider myself a Latina. I
Hmm.
reject those labels.
Hmm.
So I was just theorizing and theorizing about this stuff, having myself removed from it. And then these last couple of weeks is like, well, you can't do that. Like you are racialized. You are classified as a Latina. So you
Right.
need to think this through a lot more. And so going back, you know, to indigenous feminism, Black feminisms, and standpoint theory, and like flesh theory, and like all of these things, it's like, okay, well, then I'm just going to be open with everybody. I'm writing this paper out as a Chicana, and this is how I feel about Latinidad.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
Latinx came directly out of queer people and their critiques of Latinidad. And therefore, like Patricia Hill Collins says, we should take these concepts that come from the grassroots and people and reinvigorate them with these radical politics. And
Hmm.
that doesn't necessarily mean that we are reifying, but we are actually showing it as the subaltern that it is, as the challenge that it is to this grander, you know, political phenomena. And so that's kind
Hmm.
of where I'm going, where I'm kind
Okay.
of, you know, like doing this Ansaldúa autoethnography type of stuff, and really blending my story in and focusing it as part of the analysis which I wasn't doing before. So it's creating this weird, yeah,
Yeah,
this
no, it is
weird.
interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's the whole idea of just like, okay, so I mean, two things, you're using it against itself essentially, right? It's
Yes,
kind of like
yes.
turning it on its head, which is really, I think, I always say like in and against, right? That's like, I've tried throwing stones from outside and it doesn't do anything. So I have to infiltrate it and burn it down from the inside out. And that's very much what I try to do in what I do a lot of the time. So, but it's again, I forgot where I was going with that. But I mean, I think, yeah, no, I think it's important to kind of to reclaim those words, because they already exist, and it's very difficult to try to tear it down from the outside, because it's, I mean, you're up against a system that people believe in, and unless you do it all at once, it's nearly impossible, right? It's just not going to happen. And it takes, I mean, education is one of those things, right? Like your students, I'm sure that you teach them all of this, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Have you seen kind of a shift in these young people's like perspectives on the world because of you being their teacher? Do you feel like you're making a difference in that sense, and that's kind of a sort of activism itself?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've had a hard time
Mm-hmm.
transitioning from being more involved in like grassroots movement, like the immigrant rights movement, organizing, like street politics or protest politics,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff, to being a professor, where now my terrain of intervention is also the classroom. So I kind
Yeah.
of function off of like this slogan of like defund the bigots, right? Go after all the money, no more white men getting grants for this stuff, give it to us, liberate the classrooms. We do not have to teach this mainstream status quo imperialist knowledge. Like, we don't have to do that. And so now when I approach my class in that way, I mean, I don't see this as like me having a massive impact. I'm just facilitating that, like I'm bringing forward these different ideas and these different methods and critiques of the discipline of the world. And it's up to the students, to really make the connections and decide for themselves whether they want to change their worldview or be open-minded. So I see myself more as a facilitator of that learning. And, I was just talking to another student before this class, and I was they're interested in taking one of my classes. I do feminist and queer research methods, and we come at it from an indigenous perspective.
Yeah.
Like, we just decolonize methodologies. And so I was telling them that I had a student last winter who was like angry. Like, I think it was like the last day of class, and she was sitting there like just angry. She's like, I can't believe I was not taught any of this in my entire time at this university.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, she was about to graduate. She's like, I don't even, like, what do we even do with this now? Like
Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
this
Like,
stuff that
you're
I
telling
learned
me
for a
this
year.
now, right?
Yeah, you're telling me this now. And so there is some of that anger. There's a lot of excitement that I see too, where it's like light bulbs going off, like it helps
Mm-hmm.
people make more sense of their lives. Cause I do tend to get a lot of queer students in my class, which is awesome. So it's like a lot of people are like self-selecting into my classes because they know like my politics and all of this. And so it's beautiful to see the
That's good.
change, but
Yeah.
it's also like shitty when they get angry, because it's like, I'm sorry, like I
Mm-hmm.
don't like, I'm sorry, that's all I can say.
Yeah.
Because it is huge. It's a huge thing to
It's a big
abolish
thing.
the ivory tower.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean, I remembered, but also what I was going to say, and I think a big part of it, you're inserting yourself and your own personality and your own being into your daily life. You're not no longer kind of separating yourself from that.
No.
And then in your writing as well. And I think it's important to do that. I mean, I think, but a big turnoff for me was it kind of goes back to like the idea of qualitative versus quantitative work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's necessary. I think both are important, and I think cross methods approach is really good, because I feel like you really need to contextualize things,
Mm-hmm.
because you start separating people off into numbers and to data, and then you start losing the real story. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the story is very important. Do you find yourself in your writing and even in your teaching, like inserting yourself as an example? Or, I mean, because I think it's a lot of the time it's very taboo to be like, unless the data doesn't show it, don't talk about it, right? Have you found yourself kind of doing that more?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Positionality is everything, you know. And like last 2 years ago, I think now, I went to a conference
Hmm.
and we were writing a paper on Afro Latinidad. And of course, I'm not an Afro Latina, so like positionality is important, you know. Like I'm interpreting Afro Latinidad from my non-Afro Latina brain and perspective.
Hmm.
And so I started off the presentation for this co-authored paper talking about positionality and saying, hey, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this. This other author identifies as this, and this. And the 15-minute block that we had, I used up like 8 minutes just explaining my positionality, you know?
Hmm.
And it's to us, it's super, super important. But even the structures of academia do not allow for that, you know?
Hmm.
And when you write papers and you send to publication, it's the same thing. But for me, it's definitely super important to understand where the person is coming from, because we are about to read or write or read or listen based on their lens. We got everything filtered through their lens. And so if I know where that person is coming from, that can give me an idea of how this person came to these conclusions, you know?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's not that, you know, Black folks can't write about Latinx or Latinx can't, you know, like people can write about these different topics, but it's how you understand how you're coming at these topics that's really important. And so I do that with my classes as well. We start off, you know, first day of the quarter, we do the syllabus, all that stuff. But I have this little PowerPoint where I talk about me, like who I am, and I
Hmm.
tell them like, hey, I am a communist. I believe in decolonization. I am
Yeah.
anti-state. I am this and I am that. That's where I'm coming from. So you know that in this class, that's the perspective we're going to, you know, analyze the world from. I don't think that we should be like these neutral parties where students have to figure out if we're like it's always Republican or Democrat, right? And it's like I'm neither of those things. And I'm not gonna make you guess, because guessing reverts back to the status quo, you know?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I definitely think it's super important to be very explicit about who you are and where you're coming from.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people are put off by the fact that like I'll openly say, yeah, I'm a communist.
Oh yeah, people are
Yeah,
put
like
off.
I'm just they're like, what? Because it's just they think back to like traumas from the past and Red Scare
Totally.
and this and that, right? And all the BS and propaganda.
Hmm.
But it's what I find most often than not is that people really don't understand that it's an economic system, not a way of governing, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of is too, you know,
Is
it's
it
a way
though?
more
I mean, it's
complicated.
a way of governing in the sense that like, okay, economically everyone is supposed to be at the same level, right?
Hmm.
But governing, I mean, how did Fidel say it? He's like, the only way to really kind of make change is by making it happen yourself, kind of, and I'm paraphrasing, right? But then you see the fact that like there have been democratically elected communists.
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, the CIA took one of them down,
Hmm.
but it can happen. So more than anything, I mean, you can be a communist and still, believe in voting, no, in
Hmm.
like in democracy.
Sure. I mean,
I mean, I
yeah.
don't know. I mean, maybe prove me wrong.
Oh, I mean, I'm not going to try to prove you wrong. I'm just
Yeah.
going to extend that conversation and say,
Hmm.
you know, there are different ways of being a communist and of
Yeah.
understanding communism, right? Because even if you come at it from, you know, an indigenous perspective or even a black or, you know, brown
Hmm.
Chicanx perspective, even communism itself, Karl Marx, like we talk about Cedric Robinson
Hmm.
in his book, I can't even remember the name right now, but anyway, Racial Capitalism. He
Hmm.
talks about how Marx and all these other folks that we really look to for these type of ideas, they are products of their times, and that was the height of imperialism and the development of these type of settler colonial ideas. So, you know, it's not enough to just call ourselves communists and have one particular way of viewing communism, because we have to take it as a whole. Again, that context, like you said, is so
Hmm.
important. How did communism even develop as an idea, and what does that mean when we think about indigenous sovereignty, right? Because I don't think Marx was talking about indigenous
Oh
sovereignty
no,
or
no,
returning the land. So I
no.
feel like even like socialism, definitely, like I myself had settler socialist ideas. I thought it was socialism, but no. When we don't engage with the land, when we don't engage with Native genocide and African enslavement, and what that means for the future, if we can't place these folks in the future, then that's some settler ideology, you know? And
Mhm.
so when we talk about communism, we definitely have to expand our discussions to include these elements that Marx and other folks that we look to didn't really engage in a substantive manner that included their ideas, not just from them observing,
Yeah.
but that includes their ideas of what communism means, you know?
So what's some good
So,
books? So what are some good books for me to kind of read? I'm gonna write them down, and so that
oh
way
shoot.
listeners can kind of like, yeah, go grab it if you have it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. First one, this one is a major one. No one is illegal. If you want to understand like that historical political development of immigration
Uh-huh.
and capitalism and state politics, this is a good one. And you will have to bring your own understanding of settler colonialism because it's missing in this one.
Hmm.
That's a big one. This one also changed my life. This is what I use for my research methods class, Linda Toohey Weiss Smith, Decolonizing Methodologies.
Hmm.
This one will explain to you how imperialism is a guiding force in all of our lives in history. And it explains how it's insidious in
Hmm.
academia
Hmm.
and our different research methods. So just these two books
And what was the
together.
what was the one that you just mentioned before that about looking at Marx?
Oh, looking at Marx.
No, you said that it critiques Marx not looking at indigenous. Did you say? Did you
Oh,
mention
that
that?
was just me.
That was.
That was just me.
I wrote that one.
There have been critiques. I just don't know off the top of my head what
Oh,
they
I thought you
are. So I
said. I
can
thought you
definitely
had said it
follow
like
up
a
with
book
you.
title. Yeah, I thought you had said a book
Yeah.
title.
And then this one, the
Intersectionality.
intersectionality one, Patricia
Hmm.
Hill Collins. So one thing that I've noticed a lot and that's growing is the mainstreaming of identity politics, just like Latinx,
Hmm.
to this point where now people are rejecting identity politics as these divisive, kind of shallow type of politics. But in reality, it was queer, black, socialist lesbians that came up with identity politics as a very radical, coalitional
Hmm.
type of mentality of organizing against the system, you know, and it's been co-opted and watered down to the point where it's the Democratic Party pandering to like, people of color type of stuff. But
No, I
these
yeah,
three
trust me, I
books,
know. I know, I
yeah.
know. I mean, my company, the company I'm working for, is directly impacted by the executive order
Mm,
saying, certain trainings or education on diversity, intersectionality, and conscious biases. So that's kind of an interesting thing to be experiencing in this world right now, right? But um, can I get your thoughts on like the state of the world in the election? I mean, are you willing to speak to it?
I mean, oh
If
yeah, I'm
if not,
definitely
it's
down to
cool.
talk about it.
Okay.
So the thing to me is that uh, I think that national politics are gone, like they're shot. Like we have no fucking say as regular people in what goes on. There's way too much money, way too much
Oh,
corruption.
yeah.
There's just way too much power politics that we can't influence. You
Was
know?
there ever though? I mean, I feel like there's this
No,
illusion of
there
the fact
wasn't.
that the US has never, I always say, I mean, I remember watching this film and I got it from this film said, killing them softly. You ever watch that?
No, I know the. Isn't there a song? There's a song, right?
No, there's a song, but the film is essentially Brad Pitt's a hitman, right? And at the end,
Oh.
he's talking about like the whole, it's kind of juxtaposed with the McCain Obama election
Mm,
and the race and then just kind of going back and forth with each other. And at the end, it's like America is not a government. It's like, so stop saying it is. It's a fucking business. So give me my money.
mhm,
You're
mhm,
right. And I thought to myself, I'm like, no, that's exactly true. Like the United States has never been, it was never meant to represent the people.
mhm,
It was all about taxes, right? The revolution of the United States itself didn't deconstruct the system. It just put different people in charge.
mhm,
That's all
mhm.
it was, right? That's all it did. The taxes didn't go away. The taxes stayed,
Yeah.
right? And it's a big thing that kind of shifted.
For sure. And I mean, that's like another illusion, right? Like the Western imperialism functions on illusions because it gets us all freaking mixed up and trying to make sense of all these logics. And when you have confused people, it's a lot easier to play these divide and conquer games that got us to this
Hmm.
point, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I just discovered the work of Gerald Horne. He's a historian. He's fucking brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant. And he has this book. He's written over like 30 books,
Mm-hmm.
but he has this one that I've been meaning to like go through. I've seen a lot of his lectures where he argues that 1776, right, the American Revolution, the start of this great nation, was actually a counter-revolution that was sparked because of imperial wars between the British and the Spanish. And what they were doing was that they were arming their Black enslaved people and African peoples, their
Mm-hmm.
the people that they had in their empires, to fight each other, right, for
Mm-hmm.
control of the British and the Spanish. And the Americans got super fucking nervous because of all these Black folks getting armed and getting empowered, and they did not want their own enslaved population to rise up. And so they pushed this counter revolution to make sure that
Yeah.
white supremacy was at the helm of this, of these colonies, of this new nation that was coming out. So from its inception, the American nation has been a counter-revolution against Black people and against Indigenous people. It just, to me, it blew my
Mm-hmm.
mind, because we think about, like, yes, we understand America as a settler state, as a settler nation,
Mm-hmm.
but taking it that step further of saying, nah, not even the very motivation
Mm-hmm.
was fear of Black people and fear of Black humanity,
Yeah.
and so when you start from that premise, it all fucking makes sense, right? All of
Yeah.
these illusions go out the window. This government is not here for anything else but to protect the ruling capitalist elite,
It
who
never
have
was.
been
Yeah, it
in
never
the
was.
same
Mm-hmm.
people, yeah, since those times, because it's the same families, the same money, the same power politics, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, that's why, to me, this there is nothing supportable of American society, not its government, not its values, its
Mm-hmm.
morals, its ideas. Nothing, to me, is salvageable. Like, we really need a complete reorganization of our entire lives and society. And to me, we have to do it based on the ethics of Indigenous people, who were the original stewards of these lands, because they
Mm-hmm.
knew they had that obligation, that knowledge of the land-based ethics, the star-based ethics, right? A
Mm-hmm.
more natural way of actually taking care of the world, not
Yeah.
based on greed and consumption and extractivism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I
So yeah, I
absolutely
threw a
agree.
lot at you there.
No, I mean, and it all makes sense. And it's part of me is just like, okay, so I stepped away from a lot of academia in that department for a lot of reasons, and a lot of it was this kind of I felt very disheartened by the reality of the thing. I was like, wait, what change can actually happen by doing this stuff, right? Because I can educate people not in academia, right? I can educate people, and I do, and I can do this public kind of sort of scholarship through podcasting and interviewing people of interest, and all these things that I saw. I got super disheartened by American politics, and a lot of people ask me why, and I'm just like, because the thing is that as the system as it stands, it cannot be reformed. It needs to be completely replaced,
Mm-hmm.
right? So why, for me, I'm just like, yeah, I'm in and against a lot of the time, but there's parts of me I'm just like, you know what, I'm not no longer gonna perpetuate the system that's not working for me, so I can't be part of it, right? So I'm gonna try to reform it, or try to replace it somehow, right? Whether it's educating my children, or spreading, using my voice to kind of leverage the message and other alternatives that people can do. So I mean, it seems like you kind of have a good understanding. Can I ask, is that why you're so close to Canada, just in case the shit hits the fan?
No, because Canada is also a settler colonial state, and they also treat people like me like shit.
They do.
That's
They do.
that's one thing that's really frustrating about liberals, is that they have this idea, I'm just gonna go to Canada. It's like, bruh, like, it's literally the
Romanticization of
same
just like,
fucking thing.
it's white liberalism, right? White
Yeah,
liberalism, they romanticize European politics. They romanticize Canada as like this place where this stuff doesn't exist, when in reality, no, like it exists
yeah,
everywhere on a
it
global
does.
scale. And it has
Yes.
been happening. And it's just, it frustrates me. Like, white liberals irritate the shit out of me,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
They do.
And it's just, you're like, yeah, pretty much, dude.
I don't associate. I try to, not really associate. It's hard because a lot of my colleagues are liberals, and whatever, they can be whatever they want. And it's our choice whether we want to entertain those arguments or not. And I choose really not to engage with them. I engage with them with my students, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. because that's I try to create safe spaces for people to explore their
Yeah.
politics.
Yeah.
But on the general, like, I just don't have time to entertain these things anymore,
Mm-hmm.
because it's it just, how can you be repeating these things over and over generationally, these ideas,
Mm-hmm.
and they just don't make sense,
Mm-hmm.
so you obviously are not taking the time to sit down and reflect on these things and what people like myself are telling you,
Yeah.
right? They just are not doing it. And it's it's really frustrating. And I just remembered something that I was going to say earlier when you
Mm-hmm.
asked a different question about the
Yeah.
elections.
Yeah.
And so what I've been, talking about with my homies and with students is that, when you look at Trump and you look at Biden, the only difference is the label of Democratic Party or Republican Party, right? The partisan label is different. The way that they engage with people is a little bit different. I mean, you have Trump calling people rapists and all this stuff, right? And then you have Biden yelling at people, calling them like stupid and all of this,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we're being treated like shit regardless of political party. That's one thing. When you actually look at the policies, I mean, Biden might slow down some of the violence, maybe, but internationally, what's he going to do? Obama was like the drone king, like
Mm-hmm.
Biden is just going to follow in that. He has the history of being this fucking like the crime bill stuff, these
Oh
terrible
yeah.
positions
Yeah.
on criminal justice, And so at the end of the day, to me, it's like, okay, there's going to be violence against us. There's going to be lynchings. People will die
Mm-hmm.
after the elections. And the way that I see it is that with Trump, these lynchings might be in celebration because their guy won. And if it's for Biden, there's going to be lynchings, but in revenge because their guy didn't win.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, we're going to fucking die.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I don't think that liberals are really thinking about. All they care about is that Trump, the guy that they hate, is not going to be president. It's like, well, that's not enough for us anymore.
Because
There
no
is
matter what, they're
no,
going to be fine. No matter what, they're going to be
yes,
fine. That's
exactly.
why.
But we're not,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing, that there is no time for reform, especially when we have global climate change just completely devastating us. We
Mm-hmm.
only have a few years to save ourselves. There
Mm-hmm.
is no time for reform. The system has to go now, or we go with it.
Yeah. So, but when it comes to like the coming up election, right? And we'll wrap up now here, but like when it comes with the election, I totally disagree with me. And I feel like a lot of the people do, but I always say like, listen, like you can vote for a third party and you can do all of this stuff and that's cool. Like you could do your thing. But part of me at the same time is just like, dude, because I think I'm too scared to vote for another party because if Biden doesn't win, yeah, he's, the different side to the same coin. But if he doesn't win, you're going to be fine no matter what. But I may not,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for me, I don't have the privilege to be able to just kind of vote for a third party a lot of the time, or just not vote. Like it's my livelihood on the line here. And I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like obviously like the system needs to be changed completely and taken out? Given the fact that we exist, just like the Latinx thing that it exists, that we're in it. I mean, are you an active participant?
I'm not an active participant in electoral politics in terms of I'm out there campaigning or I'm out there
Right.
like vote, vote, vote. I think, just to take a step back, we're assuming that voting in the national elections means that the winner of the popular vote is actually going to be
Oh
put in
no.
power,
Oh no,
right?
it's
And
not gonna
that's not
happen.
what happened.
I just listened to a podcast this morning on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
electoral,
Yeah.
I mean, Trump is in power
He
not
lost like
because of
three
the
by 3
popular
million
vote.
votes. Right. Yeah. He got
Right. Yeah.
3 million
So that
votes.
whole third party non-voter stuff, like that kind of goes out the window with this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, it doesn't matter at the end of the day, this state is going to choose a person that is best for its own sustainment. And, at this point, both of them are good for it. So it doesn't really matter who wins. It's over here at the social level that we have to worry about. Right.
So the
But to
elections
me,
are just to distract us then. It's just like
yes, yes. Well,
illusion of power and choice.
there you go. That's a good way to put it. And I think that the other thing is too, and I was talking to the League of Women Voters on a webinar last week about this, is that we tend to frame kind of like these insider and outsider politics, the voting and the non-voting as two separate things, when in reality, we have to be, strategic and understand that at the end of the day, this really is class warfare. Like, this really is us against the ruling elite and their
Mm-hmm.
nation states that are suppressing us.
Yeah.
And so when we think about it that way, and we think about it through an intersectional power analysis, we
Mm-hmm.
can see that when you break down the system, voting is only one little thing over here. But if you really want to take down the entire state, you have to work in all these other areas simultaneously as a force, right? A united front against this. And so only voting is not going to do anything, because this system has so many different entry points
Mm-hmm.
that we need to plug up, not just that
It's not just
one
a fad, it's a
fancy
lifestyle.
one.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah, yeah.
lifestyle. And you have to live it, right? You have to live
Yes,
it on a daily basis. And if it comes up in conversation, shut it down or talk about it.
yes, yes,
It's just, that's just, you have, if you really want the change, right? You can't just be like, opt out today. Cause I'm just
yes,
like,
exactly.
of course, if you get sick, yeah, dude, like for sure. But, get some, put in your PTO and take the day. But
Yeah.
no, I get what you mean. It's such a pleasure to have you on. Like, it really is. Do you want to guide people anywhere? Any groups or anywhere that they can find your publications, anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm part of this new project, the Decolonizing Political Science Project,
Mm-hmm.
virtual community through the Western Political Science Association,
Yeah.
and it's this awesome community that we're building, and it's all people that are down with decolonial politics. So we have a
Mm-hmm.
website, decolonialpolitics.com,
Okay.
and you can see all of the different projects that we're doing there. And we have reading groups, we have just a teaching series, we have a fundraising series with Indigenous Women Rising and Mariposa Fund, who are
Mm-hmm.
based in New Mexico. So we have a whole bunch of stuff going on. So if you know other academics or even
Yeah.
community members that want to find out about these politics, we're starting this centralized space for people to go check out.
That's awesome. Yeah. Send me the link and I'll post it everywhere. You guys, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much. I'm going to hit pause here and then we'll debrief. But again, thank you guys. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.